sound in mind and sound in body. Elite athletes not only have to be peak physical condition, but also have to be sharp mentally. The growing demand for sports psychologists, both here and around the world, just shows how important mental fitness has become in competitive sports. Now, joining us for this discussion is sports psychologist Dr. Naira Orbeta. Thank you very much for joining us. Maraming salamat.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's really nice to
Miss
be
Naira.
here.
You know, it's rainy weather. I'm so glad you braved the storms to be with us.
Right.
And of course, when we talk about storms, we're here to talk about the mental storms that
Yeah.
athletes go through. But before we begin on that, I want to talk more about you, Doc. Kasi sports psychology, it's a very specific field. I mean, psychology is so broad.
Right.
Pero bakit importante na may sports psychology in particular?
Well, obviously, the field of sports is a billion-dollar industry. And it's competitive. So just that demand for having a high level of mental toughness, having psychological skills, having the proper fortitude to be able to brave that whole competitive environment really shows the need for sports psychology. And I think from an early age, because my family, although we're recreational level,
Yeah.
my family kind of was sports people. I kind of was an athlete, wannabe athlete also from that level. So I remember when I first started psychology in the undergrad, it was really just, I want to try to understand my own issues, like many of the psychologists will tell you they go into that field for. And I remember reading an article about sports psychology, and I said, I want to do that. So, that's kind of my entry into the world of sports psychology right there.
And of course, when you talk about athletes in particular, kasi I always, as someone who's covered athletes for a while, I always say na they're special kind of crazy. They have to be because of the level of competitiveness that is there. You take a look at how athletes are starting to accept sports psychology. Do you see more and more people understanding now that yung mental aspect of the game is something that they have to focus on as well?
Yes, we have been seeing a surge. I think one of the reasons for the surge really was, and we thank Heidelin Diaz for that, because Heidelin Diaz is very, very vocal about the help that she got from Team HDN, in particular Dr. Karen Trinidad, who
Yeah.
was their sports psychologist. So she opened a lot of doors for us. We've been around for maybe 30 years, but slowly getting into the scene. And it really was her triumph that got sports psychology into the mainstream conversation. And that mainstream conversation makes us really very happy, because the idea that athletes have to manage all of that competitive pressure alone is something that we kind of feel talaga for
Right.
sports psychologists. And we kind of want to be there for them, but sometimes it's hampered by the lack of education and knowledge about sports psychology, the field in itself.
Yeah, I don't think people understand, right, with sports. It's, I think, more, yes, it is really physical. That's what most people see, but it's a lot more mental than physical. So with Heidelin, like you said, what steps did you help her take to be mentally strong for the Tokyo Games?
Well, I wasn't the direct sports psychologist of Heidelin. It was Dr. Karen Trinidad. But from what we have gathered, and as I said, Dr. Karen was very, very vocal because Heidelin was vocal. It was really that they forged a helping relationship and what we call a therapeutic alliance, so that they were allies going into that whole field. And Dr. Karen was really very honest when she said it didn't come naturally, or it didn't come instantly, that kind of alliance. They had to build it up over the years, right? And when they built it up, it already reached a level where they could understand each other, they could converse about what was needed. She could really custom the program for Heidelin's personality and well-being, and that really was the helpful turning point, latchkey turning point towards really helping Heidelin reach a higher level of competitiveness.
And not only do athletes have to be mentally strong, like you mentioned, during their competitions, how would you suggest athletes, or even our viewers, how would they overcome the hate, right? If they don't perform well, I think that's the biggest setback most athletes really take personally. How would you overcome the hate on social media and vocally from people?
Right. Well, actually, all star athletes and even any of our colleagues, they say, if possible, don't look at social media too much.
Right.
Yes,
Especially going into
Impossible
a game. But
ata.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly what I said. It's just impossible because,
Yes,
like,
yes.
I mean, even for us, I mean, like, what are people saying?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
On
yeah.
social
Yes,
media,
yes.
what are people saying? But even if just to minimize a little bit, like pre-competition, like some of the coaches, basketball, volleyball, the
Yeah.
very popular sports, they said, you're in the dugout before you're going to go in the competition and you're scrolling through social media.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, at least leave that for after. I mean, because you're just supposed to be focusing on what your next step is, which is the game just about to commence, right?
Yeah.
And they're scrolling through social media. I'm not saying all athletes are like that, but
I know
coaches
a few.
nowadays, yes, exactly. I think coaches nowadays really try to impose that on athletes or
Yeah.
tell athletes, if possible, not to put down their phones
Now,
and
how
their
about,
gadgets.
Doc, athletes who suffer from injuries, like
Ah.
let's say ACL, right? How do you help them deal with this kind of setback?
Well, obviously, because that's, if you think about it, they use their body a lot. That's their tool, right? To be able to do what they do best. And you damage the tool. So the normal reaction seemingly is, in fact, to be sad,
Yes,
depressed, all of
yes.
those signs of emotions. So sometimes when we get people saying, oh, they should be able to bounce back. I mean, it was only yesterday. Bounce
Yeah.
back today already. I mean, you get the idea, the principle. Sometimes
Right,
they
right.
kind of have to go through the journey and the process of feeling first their primary emotions and then hopefully get them to a better level where they have already processed the event. And then when you get to that, we try to be their support system,
Yeah.
basically, the people behind them. So sometimes it happens first the doctor, right? Physical therapist.
Yeah.
Right? And very seldom in the Philippines do they go for the sports psychologist because I guess they kind of do all of the other things
Yeah,
first.
they think of all of the physical things before the mental.
Yes.
And I don't know. Let's see if we can kind of work on that and change that with our discussion here.
Now, Doc Naira, you talk about sports psychology here in the Philippines and how it's still growing. How many of you guys are actually here in the Philippines?
Well, I would say the core group is less than 10. But
less
we are
than
growing
10.
10 below. But there are other
Wow.
people who are sort of like, they do other fields and then
Okay.
they also sometimes practice sports
I was not
psychology.
expecting that with all our athletes and teams. 10?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, like, it's crazy when you think about that. Of course, there's a big supply and demand gap with regards to that. But then, of course, we also hear about the term motivation a lot, how keep players motivated. But I can't help but think about how parents motivate their kids as well. Talk about sports psychology. It's not just at the professional level.
Right.
It's also affecting some of the younger kids because I've talked to a lot of high-level athletes at the younger level and then how important parents are with regards to their development. What typical messages do you have to parents who may not know what they're doing to their kids in terms of their mental makeup, their psyche?
Right. For parents, they are the primary and first influence of kids, right? They are the ones that kids, in fact, don't want to disappoint. So what I always say to parents is, it's okay to want them to achieve, but you should be their safe space, their safe haven,
Right,
right?
yes.
Your job is to be a supportive parent. The job, for instance, of teaching skills is to coaches. And the job of maybe teaching other things and related to academics is obviously for teachers. But your job is to be a safe space. And you can correct maybe behavior that you don't like. Let's say, nagdadabog, no? Nadabog. Siyempre, you can correct that behavior. But you shouldn't let the kid feel less. That's the most important part. And I would like to believe parents have good intentions toward their kid, but it's the way sometimes
Yes.
that
That's
that
true.
manifests is maybe something that they need to learn a little bit more from.
I'm a mom myself, and sometimes I find myself, because my daughter is into chess, that's her sport. And sometimes, we encourage her, but I think sometimes you get to the point where you encourage too much. Like she doesn't feel like training anymore and you push. Do you experience this with other parents, and do you work with them
Right.
when in dealing with the athletes?
Right. Usually when it comes to youth sports, it's important to include everybody. One of the big aspects of our work is relationship building with the people who are the stakeholders, if you
Right,
think
right,
about
right.
it. So I guess that one of for minors especially, it's parents. And sometimes the kid will tell, my parent expects so much of me, so what do I do? So
Yeah.
I always ask permission, can I go to your parents and kind of be the bridge? And normally they say yes, but some say no, it will be worse if you talk. So that's how scared or they are of disappointing their parents.
Flashback ako sa mga college games and high school games na nakita mo sa side na galit yung mga magulang. Very loud, yelling at referees and players.
Yes.
Right.
Like minsan mga coaches nga rin eh. But then when you talk about the working in a team environment, for example, obviously the parents will be there, especially sa youth sports. But then it's also about realizing, at least for some of the kids, kung anong role nila sa team. And it feels like the approach has to be different with regards to each and every player, with regards to expectations. How would sports psychologists handle that? Yung mga ego sa team and how they all fit together.
Well, for a sports psychologist, you have to know your player, obviously. And if it's a team sport, there are individual dynamics and then there are team dynamics.
Right.
So you kind of have to do both and try to find out how you can work together. Because the success of one in team sports is the success of everyone. And even if you are, a role player, a bench player, you still play a role, in fact. You can still be a cheerer and all those kinds of things. So it's really understanding what best helps them. Sometimes I have this exercise, who likes challenge here? And then who likes calmness? And then really divide, right?
Yeah.
Kung yung gusto niyo pinapagalitan ng coach, sino yung mga dito, and who wants to be like, so encouraged, and they will really divide. So you can see, and even coaches are surprised. Like, I didn't realize that you didn't like this and you didn't like that. So sometimes it's really just planting awareness for the coaches and for the other people in that setting.
Yeah.
That is helpful.
And aside from what you just talked about, planting awareness, what are other important or most used skills that you help athletes perform?
Right. Well, obviously, it's coping with the demands of competition. Competitive anxiety is a big thing. Performance anxiety is a big thing. And I can imagine for all of us, and we're going to do some important endeavor, we also have anxiety once we get there. But it's really managing that and getting them to understand that it's never a zero. Because you're going to competition. If you didn't want to have that kind of competitive environment, don't play sports.
Actually,
Right?
yeah.
You see, it's the demand talaga of the sport and the field itself that requires that kind of resilience and grit.
Yeah. Here's the unfortunate truth for a lot of people that maybe they don't realize, that losing happens a lot.
Yes.
Right.
How do you help athletes, especially high-level athletes, cope with losses? Because I've seen athletes who question yung mga self-worth nila after particularly bad losses.
Right. I think, again, that's one part and parcel of I call it as normal, because athletes really invest so much of their time and effort into trying to perfect their sport. But I always tell them, like, if it's just a question of winning 1 or 2 games, you can always win games. You can go inter-barangay or you can go lower level. You can win every game that you want there, right?
Yeah.
But if you're going competitive and higher levels of competition, you have to play the long game, is what I call it, right? You have to take what you learn from the losses and put it in your arsenal so that you become stronger and better. You can only challenge higher level athletes so that you also go up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I was about to say that mag-mosquito league muna ako para can build up my confidence. But then, sorry, Doc, but before we start wrapping things up here, for those who are still, I guess, skeptical about sports psychology and how it can impact the athletes, what advert could you put out there for advocating for mental health or mental strength, mental fitness for athletes in general, even those who are in a situation where they're going to compete or perform or have to have a high level of competencies for whatever event?
Well, the idea there is athletes are not robots, right? You're after holistic development. So it's not just the physical. You want to advocate for the cognitive development, emotional development, social development, and even their moral, spiritual development in terms of values as an athlete. And if you put all of that together, train everything. Why only train the one area? Train everything, because that's a holistic person you're dealing with. They are not robots.
Right.
So if you can train everything, it will be a boon for you rather than a bane.
Right.
And if you do not train the other parts, it will be to your detriment for sure.
Ma'am, for those undergrads who are deciding whether or not they should really focus on sports psychology, what can you say to them?
Please come and join us. We are few in number, but we are fun. Let's say that.
I love
that. Right? We're fun, we're cool. We like to think that. We label ourselves that. But it's a field that you can grow with. maybe our generation, it's not yet well developed, but hopefully the next generation, it will be as developed as clinical psychology or other counseling psychology. So we advise everyone who is interested or even partially interested to ask us, and we can point you in the right directions for continuing education.
All right, so only 10 of them in the Philippines right now. Sana that dumami rin.
I hope that, like triple
We need it.
soon.
We need it in the country, yes.
Absolutely. Again, Doc, maraming salamat. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And of course, you
Thank
can
you.
look her up on her social medias as well for any more information.